1. Hello, everybody. I'm your host, Zenitsu, and you're listening to the Digi Talks podcast, the show that covers various topics from news to meta developments and everything in between for the fine folks who love the Digimon trading card game. Just as a quick reminder, I do stream this live over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, and it's also uploaded as a YouTube video under the channel of Zenitsu, on top of being on various podcasting platforms like Spotify for your viewing and listening pleasure. Please feel free to leave that rating, like, follow, subscribe, and review, and whatever else, depending on the platform that you're listening on. It really does help support the podcast. Today, I am back with my co-host, Jay Stewart, and today we're going to be talking about some design do's and don'ts, especially when it comes to the Digimon TCG. And by design do's and don'ts, just as a quick little side, it's just things like almost kind of rules to kind of follow, so that way you don't accidentally print like kind of just broken cards. In a sense, that's kind of just the idea, is what can they reasonably do within a healthy and reasonable boundaries without just accidentally trying to break the game. That's kind of just the whole gist of what I'm trying to accomplish with that conversation. But before we get into that, we do have tons of news and announcements, considering Bandai did just do like a whole 15-minute video on the unification news. So we're going to be going over some of the highlights on that, and we also do have some more tournaments. We have 2 tournaments to talk about, but before we get into that, before the main conversation, let's just dive right into the question of the week, and, well, it kind of relates to, you know, all of the news and announcements on how we're actually feeling about unification as we get more news and closer to that date. So, Jay Stewart, how are you feeling about unification? More confident, less confident, happy, excited? Like, what do you got?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously the live streaming, I might be dipping a little bit into what they had announced and everything, but in the way the live stream, they kind of gave us a schedule about all the products that they plan on releasing and everything. So we already kind of like we're feeling a little bit of our wallets probably were feeling a little bit of a rough patch, I guess you could say, the past 3 months-ish with all the products going back to back. But based on the product schedule, it looks like they have a decent schedule going. It's a consistent flow. It's a nice, even pattern of what we could expect future products to come out in. So it'll help relieve our wallets of the burden of being so empty for so long, I guess you could say. So I'm actually kind of glad about the whole unification schedule of the product schedule release they did too as well announce.
Yeah, and we'll get into more of that when we actually get to that segment. As far as like how I'm feeling about unification, it's kind of just the same feeling that I've been in, where I'm essentially holding my breath, waiting for the next ban and restriction update to see if they could actually fix the game, because I think the game may or may not be irreparably damaged to the point of no return. And like, unless they just do like a really big ban and restriction list, which again, that's kind of just why I'm holding out, because as far as the game's like overall health in terms of design and where things have gone, this year has been one of the most roughest years I have ever seen when it comes to the overall power scaling of the game. It's easily the strongest like year we've ever had, and not necessarily for the best. So the way I kind of like to describe it is, imagine kind of like a graph where it's just like each set usually increases or like ticks up a number in terms of its overall power by 1. So if you have the very first set start off at, let's just say 0, just to keep things easy, because that's the base of the game. Then by set, let's just say 4 or 5, it should be upticked to 5. Or if you just want to do 3s just to make life easier, or 4s. I guess 4s would be easier because that's how blocks are designed, is in 4s. So by the end of block 1 or block 0, it should be like a power level of 4. Then when they go into block 1, it should be a 1 step backward to do 2 steps forward, essentially. So when they start block 1, it should be a power level of a 3 if the end of block 0 started off at a 4. And then it kind of goes up and down from there. I feel like the jump that we had from block block 2 to block 3, by the end of block 3, it jumped way too much without any like backtracking. So it just pushed the power way too much, way too quickly. And that's kind of why I feel like the game is in a very unhealthy state. That and multiple card design failures and absolute complete design negligence, which got me thinking on the topic of what are some design do's and don'ts that they would want to follow to prevent mistakes from actually happening. And it's, in my perspective, a lot easier said than done, which is why I would like to share that. But do we want to do tournaments or do we want to do news first?
I think the news, since it kind of does wrap in with the question of the week.
Okay, so before we get into the tournament meta reports, because we do have 2 events to talk about. One of them is, they're both actually really large tournaments, but we don't have that much data for them. Yeah, so we could jump right into the news on what was announced. So what topic do you want to kind of dive into first when it comes to the news? Because we do have, like, anyone who just wants to, like, get that raw information, go watch the video or like the VOD of the stream. But we're here just to try to break it down. So I guess like I'll kick things off. The biggest piece of news that was the most relevant for me personally was the fact that we finally got confirmation that Applimon is going to be making it into the game as of World Convergence, which is looking to be another hero based, like protagonist based set. We are actually going to be getting Applimon, which is huge because Applimon's always been Digimon adjacent, so now this opens up the doors for them to do an entire Applimon set. Granted, there's not a ton of Applimon, but just something is better than nothing in my perspective when it comes to having it be represented, considering the card game to me is a celebration of the Digimon IP. So, what other news do you got, Jay Stewart?
I mean, just to kind of add on about the whole Applimon thing, I mean, I do think that is probably a smart choice to go with that theme of all the protagonists coming together to be the set that brings all the regions together. Kind of nice little touch that Bandai did there. But just something else to kind of mention too, like on the pack card, like right away I see there's apparently supposed to be some War Growlmon, Rise Greymon, a Goonimon, and even Magnamon's on here. So guess get ready to look out for those decks too as well, along with a Carano, the what is that, Gamamon? I think right for the uh why can't I think Ghost Game? That's
Oh,
what it is.
it's Canna Weiss. Yeah.
Yeah, Canawise. Then there's also the Hunter's deck and even Crossheart deck. So
Yeah,
just
it's
more decks to look out for the future, I guess.
yeah, it's all the ultimate on the pack art. It's all of the ultimates of all of the main protagonists. Granted, there is no ultimate for Davis, which is why they went with Magnamon, but it's all of the ultimates for all of the protagonists. So there's a lot of protagonists, and they're all going to get some support. So all of those decks are definitely something you would want to invest in now if you haven't already, because the last time we saw them in BT12, the vast majority of them were meta relevant. Or they had meta relevant cards that then became better later with subsequent sets. So it's definitely going to be a very hype set, to say the least. So
Yeah.
I guess with World Convergence, we do know that we're going to be getting a couple of new starter decks. The starter decks are supposed to play along with World Convergence, I believe. So, like, the idea is you get the starter decks, and then you get World Convergence, and then you're able to upgrade the starter decks from the booster set. So, it's not anything we haven't really seen before, just pointing that out there. So the decks are going to be Starter Deck 20, Protectors of Light, featuring War Greymon. And then this will also have Tai, Kari, Izzy, and Sora represented in it. And then Starter Deck 21 is Heroes of Hope, which is going to be the other characters of the Adventure cast, because we always got to go back to Adventure. It's their cash cow. So that's going to be featuring Metal Garurumon and Matt, TK, Joe, and Mimi. And you can apparently combine and mix and match cards with starter decks 20 and 21. So that way you could have more interesting combinations. I don't exactly know how that's going to play. We only know a little bit of information when it comes to the Tamers, because the Tamers are two colored cards, and they're relying on the adventure like
Right.
tagline. So like all the cards are traded adventure cards. So that's going to be like the cross synergy support that they're going to be banking on is, oh, this card works whenever an adventure traded card is played. So that seems to be what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I think it's also just kind of a nice little thing that I've also noticed. It looks like the background of the arts of both the War Greymon and the Metal Garurumon, it looks like they're in like a city. So I think they might be doing the whole the first time War Greymon and Metal Garurumon made their appearance when they were in the real world and everything. That's what makes sense to me on that. And kind of hence why, you have like the whole Kari's in with the tie because, her Angelmon shooting tie was what caused War Greymon to finally become in. Same thing with TK, Angemon shooting his arrow at Matt. But I think something else that was also kind of just food for thought here too was they did announce also that apparently for BT21 they did announce that there will be BT21 will have an Omnimon serial number card campaign, and the fact that War Greymon or Metal Greymon is in BT21, it's safe to say that BT21 is going to be even further supporting those two starter decks as well with the whole adventure trait or theme, however you want to call that.
Yeah. So that's going to be really interesting when we get there. We do also have new card sleeves that they announced. I'm not like they're just card sleeves. Bandai's card sleeve quality is not the highest, but the art is nice. So anyone who's getting any kind of Bandai card sleeve, highly recommend outer sleeves just to protect those cards because they tend to peel and don't shuffle very well. But we're getting more sleeves, so yay. Um,
There's a couple that look at least good to me and everything, but not necessarily too crazy amount. Like I've kind of been picky about which card sleeves I usually get that are Bandai themed and everything.
yeah, because of their quality, I've also been a lot pickier too, than I used to. I used to buy like all four of them just for collector's sake, and then I'm just like, no, I'm kind of done with that. I've scaled a lot back on Digimon, just because I'm not necessarily the happiest, but I still want to support what's good. Speaking of supporting new things, they did change. Like they're gonna have a logo change, and yeah, that's it. They showed off a new logo, so that's cool. It's featuring Pateramon in the center of a D for Digimon, so that's nice. And then when we actually get to that was all announced before the stream or like leaked before the stream. So, Jster, if you want to talk about the product schedule, because we do know the full timeline of 2025, all the way up to like basically April of 2025 to March of 2026.
Yeah, so far what they have announced and everything is that they've announced in April 2025 we're supposed to be getting the two starter decks we mentioned earlier and BT21. Um, After that, the next product we get is going to be in June, and that's going to be for the sleeves that we also just mentioned, and also EX09. I don't think we have any information on EX09 yet either. July is supposed to have BT22, September EX10, and then October BT23, and then we won't get product again until BT24 until January and EX11 in February. Now, of course, this doesn't include anything like side sets, limited sets, gift boxes they included on here because I don't think they wanted to announce stuff that early, so to say.
Yeah, this is just their core products, like their core set, not necessarily core sets, but the main sets that we generally would play with because I don't know exactly what they would have on the docket. It is interesting that this entire year they so far only announced one set of starter decks. I know in some of Bandai's other card games, they've been doing a lot better job on starter decks. We've already mentioned starter decks in previous episodes of the podcast being one of the weakest points in Digimon. Not that they're like weak decks, but like the fact that we just don't get a whole lot of starter decks or demo decks, and I think that's kind of a problem if you're trying to grow your game. You would want to obviously have tons of introductory product for players. So, or at least keep it fresh enough to have people constantly want to be interested, invested in those products. So, I don't know if we're going to get any more starter decks throughout the year. I would hope so, because we have not heard anything on the next advanced deck, which usually comes out in May, or like April, May area. And this time it's going to be actually just new starter decks. And then to wrap up like the product release schedule for the stuff before April, we know that obviously the like this coming weekend is going to be the special limited set that's going to have the LM cards and promos that we were missing. Then in January we get EX8. So we get EX8 before 2.0, and 2.0 is going to be released in February of 2025. Or yeah, 2.5 is going to be releasing in February. So yeah, we have like a 2 or 1.5 month gap between 2.5, which is when we're technically all caught up, and then the set where it's releasing worldwide. So yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see what kind of happens. One thing to note when it comes in looking at the schedule is the fact that we have upped the amount of EX sets that we had from 2 to 3. So in the past, we always had 2 EX sets. The Resurgence booster kind of, I guess I could say, messed that up. And then they just decided instead of doing another Resurgence, they're just going to do another EX to fill that same exact slot. So that's kind of why you see this like really weird schedule when it comes to EX sets, because before it was every 6 months on a different time front, like a different timeline than normal BT sets. So yeah, that's one thing I just wanted to point out that I found interesting is a new EX set is, or a third EX set is replacing Resurgence sets.
Yeah, I also think it's nice that they actually paced like the main booster box core sets and everything to be like kind of spaced like 3 months in between. It looks like for this entire upcoming year, so to say.
Yeah, they've
So
always been like that, though. It's just with EX sets, it always felt extra funky because we consider in our brains EX sets to be similarly enough to baseline sets where we have to buy into it or we want to buy into it. Especially this past year where EX5 and EX5 and EX6 were insane. EX7 was to update starter decks and start something else, so like it filled a kind of a different role. So I don't know. But yeah, EX sets is what makes BT sets feel shorter in terms of the time gap, but it's always been 3 months.
yeah, I just think like I feel like they have to be coming out with something though, sometime between November and December because between like BT23 and BT24, there's like 2 months of nothing is supposed to be out. Like obviously we're probably gonna get a holiday box of some kind again for that one,
I mean, I'm
but
okay with that gap. Like yeah, they're probably going to have some like side supplementary products, but like looking at the schedule, there's almost no 2 month gap where we're not buying something. So we're literally buying something almost every other month, if not almost every month. No, it is almost every other month. So having a little bit more of a break is going to be refreshing, especially for our wallets. If anyone's actually investing in every single set like I was, I don't know if I'm going to continue to invest as hard as I have been. I've again been scaling back because I'm not super thrilled with the current state of the game, but that's just me voting with my wallet.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to also see like them do starter decks of like maybe like every year they could do one of each color with the exception of white because there's not enough decks, so to say. Like maybe Eosmon or maybe Mother that could be white decks, but either way, like if they could just do like every year like a deck gets its own color, like starter deck, that way new players could even try to explore other colors too, besides the common blue and red ones they always keep doing.
Yeah, yes, I 100% agree with you on that. Um, then, when it comes to some of the other news, we are going to be getting signed cards from a couple of the different artists. Um, so that's kind of be cool. We do know what artist is or like making a new card of what Digimon. So as far as the Digimon's concerned, we're going to be getting a new or a reprint with new art of Zephigamon, Grace Novamon, Lanamon, Agunimon, Wargreymon X Antibody, Titamon, and Beelzemon Blast Mode. So those are going to be really fun. Or that might just be what they've drawn and what people have liked. I think that's what they've drawn. So I might be mixing that up. I do know that we are going to be getting like some new arts of old cards because I know Gallantmon was like the BT13 Gallantmon was on the list of cards that's going to get reprinted and redrawn. So I think those were just some of the cards that the artists had drawn. That would make sense.
Yeah, because I know there's like for the thing you were talking about with the Galamon, like it shows. I took a screenshot of it. It looks like they had BT14 War Greymon, Emperor Greymon from BT12, Dorogoromon from BT16, Gaiomon from BT9, the Galamon from BT13, and I believe that's the starter deck Mastermon. And it says here the six Digimon cards chosen by users at DigimonCon 2024. Uh, it looks like illustrators for the new card.
Yeah, so the
So
illustrators
yeah,
of those Digimon that I mentioned are going to be designing new illustrations for the Digimon that you just mentioned. There we go. Fixed it. Nailed it.
so yeah, I know there is a couple on here that are really good. I mean, I personally like the Gaiomon. Honestly, that's like one of my favorite. Like honestly, the BT9 one is like one of my favorite ones that they've made so far. Nothing wrong with the EX4. It's just not as good as the EX9 one, so to say. And just even getting another chance to get that Secret Rare Galmon because I don't even think I got. I think I only got one of those, so that'd be nice to even get.
Yeah. Then we do have their, I guess, event waves for the year. We don't know, obviously, how many of what event is going to be happening, but we do know the time frame in which these waves are going to be taking place for each of the different regions when it comes to competitive play. So, starting in April, it's going to go to Cycle 1, which is going to be Regionals Wave 1 for both North America and Europe and Latin America and Oceania. And then just North America is going to have the first finals. There's going to be two finals in August. And then Wave 2 is going to continue from September to November, a break in December, and then the national finals is going to be in January. When it comes to Wave 2 for the other English speaking territories, they basically are on that same time frame. They just don't have a first finals, and their second national finals is going to be around the same time frame as North America. And then Japan and Asia are doing their own thing. Um, so, yeah, and then China kind of also has its own thing. It is interesting to note that they're including China in the Grand Asian Finals, which is at the end of Cycle 1. And then the Grand Finals is going to be in March, which encompasses everyone. So, yeah, kind of similar to what they're trying to start doing this year because Our nationals is in January, so same time next year, and then Worlds is in March, which again is going to be the same time next year. They call it Grand Finals, but it's essentially Worlds.
Yeah, what I am kind of curious about this whole schedule is, so like say North America, we have what appears to be two finals. Does that mean if you got went to the finals in August and say you got top two for that one in the August one, does that mean you get automatically moved to the grand finals, or do you still have to compete in the January national finals? Because it does technically list them as two different finals.
I believe if you get to finals in either of them, you qualify for Worlds. So, because that's how it is with Asia, is with the Grand Asia Finals, is that's how a lot of people qualify for Worlds initially.
Yeah, that look. Yeah, because I can see like the red arrow for the Grand Asia Finals moving all the way over to Grand Finals. So I see that. I just didn't see it for the August Finals one. So it just had me a little wondering what that is exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, they didn't really announce too much information about what those finals are. It just shows there's two finals. So I mean, I'm excited for that, honestly. I just hope that they don't like. I mean, if they want to keep it in like the same location just to make it convenient, yeah, sure, that makes sense. But I mean, just getting to have two finals in different locations around the world could just even be better.
Yeah,
Well, better in the United States. Sorry.
let's just hope they actually have enough events to kind of support it, because if they don't have enough events, then it kind of makes the schedule feel a lot more lackluster. Because usually in like a wave time frame, we generally get about 12 to 15ish events, give or take. Um, so it really just depends. Like it usually in a set cycle from BT set to BT set, we get like 12 to 15 events. So I really hope that they up it so that way more people have more opportunities, and I hope obviously there's going to be more in-store play. So because that's important, is being able to play the game that you're buying into. Then when it comes to, speaking of like stores, we also have Tamer Party Pack, or like Tamer Packs and store kits getting an update. So it's going to change every 2 months. So that's going to be cool. And we do know a couple of the prizes. So right now we are on, what is it? Mil Maildramon, Shoutmon, Darulu Cannon, Mirage Galgamon, and Pawn Device. That's like whatever that pack is our current cycle. So that's going to be changing. Yeah. And then the next one we're going to be getting is like Shellmon, Shumon, or Shellmon, Shushumon, Galemon, Close, um, Yowie, the Tamer, the Bluefish Tamer, and Landramon. Um, so yeah, uh, not really much of a change. It's just that they gave us like, yeah, it's gonna be changing like every 2 to 3 months, which is like whatever. Um, then what else do we got here? Uh,
They did announce over in JP and the China region, China will actually be getting Ultimate Cups too now. I don't know if that's going to be metadata important or not, so to say, but
it could, depending on how we actually get that data. I wouldn't disclose it or discredit it, so that would be cool. Then here's an important one. When it comes to World Convergence, that is going to be releasing on April 19th, and as previously noted, sets used to feature only 106 different cards, but this set is going to have 113 for Japan and 114 for the English. So we're going to be getting a signed illustration card in that set. That's where that extra one card is. And then the other interesting thing to note is the fact that the SR count, I think, is going to be increasing, or either that or it's staying the same, from either 12 to 15. And then, yeah, so something along those lines. But
big
sets are
thing
getting a
also,
little, yeah, sets are getting a little bit bigger is the big takeaway.
yeah, because I know they also announced that there was going to be like release events. It's not like pre-release. Apparently, these are supposed to be a lot longer periods of than pre-release normally is, because normally it's a week long. I think this is actually going to be like a month or two long period, give or take. And apparently, like the prize cards that you get, like for example, there's supposed to be a BT21 prize card for this that you get, and it's supposed to connect with three other cards from BT22, BT23, and BT24.
Yeah. I think that'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out. And I think for the most part, that's kind of just all the general news. Um, Not necessarily like if you're actually like looking at it, not really anything too grand. But just stuff to talk about and stuff that's interesting or
Yeah,
could
because I
be
know I'm
interesting.
yeah, because I know I'm kind of glad because from what I'm understanding, like obviously we're currently on the 2 months of the Tamer battle packs and store tournament packs and everything. But apparently, once we get the new one, that's going to be coming every 3 months. So I'm not able to go to locals every single time. So it gives me a little bit better chance to try to pull those cards, especially trying to get play sets of them too, because you
Yeah.
never know if they may actually come up or not.
Yeah, because Bandai's usually had a really bad issue with promos. So any way to make promos more accessible is usually a good thing in my books. And I think we know that some of the promos that we're missing, like that we are missing, are going to currently just be box toppers in either EX8 or Special Booster 2.5 as of right now. So, and I think those are supposed to also be like 2 cards per pack, so it's not going to be like awful from what we had in EX5 and Special Booster, or not Special, EX5 and BT14. So 1 card
I
per
think you mean
pack.
BT17.
I mean, anytime they do 1 card per pack, it's awful. But EX, I know BT. I'm talking more specifically about like the Saber Dramon situation.
Oh yeah,
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 that was BT14. That was 1 card per pack, and that was awful. And then they did it again for EX5, and it was just as awful, if not worse.
yeah. Because I know they did it for. I'm pretty sure it is. Like they did that same thing again with BT17, but the excuse was, oh, they're foiled and textured this time though, guys. So we got to do the 1 card per pack. It's like, yeah, I get that, but you did an update pack in BT9 where you gave 2 cards, one foil, non-foil. So
Yeah. But yeah, that's basically all of the news. It really doesn't amount to anything that like is actually important. Like it is kind of important, but kind of not important because like the majority of it is just nonsense. It's not really nonsense. It's just whatever. It's like yeah, it's just a lot of take it or leave it kind of stuff. It's not anything like earth shattering. Um, so I guess speaking of nothing earth shattering, I guess we could just move on to the meta report because we've been talking about news for probably way too long, but that's okay. So we will go with the Ultimate Cup first because we had 2 events this happened this past weekend. We had a North American Ultimate Cups and then we had the European Finals. So when it comes to the North America Ultimate Cup, this was Carta Magica. I did end up playing in this. I got 110th place, 5-4, playing Takumi Kazuchi, and it was just kind of miserable because just the format's kind of miserable. The majority of my losses, if I were to actually go deep into it, was literally to Galaxy Mirage because turn 2 going up into a Mirage is very difficult to fight against for most decks because most decks want to draw and set up, before turn 2. And if they are able to get into a Mirage turn 2, it can actually just lock you out of the game and it's not fun. It really isn't when you don't get to play the game, but the opponent does because their Floodgate taxes you for doing what your deck is supposed to do. But I digress. That was my run. And as far as the event size, it was 331 players. Top 16 archetype breakdown was 5 Mirages, 3 Magnamon X's, 3 Purple Hybrids, 2 Ancient Greymons, 1 7 Great Demon Lords, 1 Imperial, and 1 Galacti. So as far as decks that actually break into this format, technically this is the first time 7 Great Demon Lords has really done anything in 2.0. So That's cool. And then obviously Galactimon definitely made its debut. It did get some new cards in 2.0, and the best black player in the world, in my perspective, was able to take the deck and top with it. I do not have any confidence that the deck is going to be meta competitive in anyone else's hands, though. So keep that in mind. That's just my own thoughts and opinions on it. As far as what actually won the event, it was 7 Great Demon Lords, followed by Imperial. Third place was Mirage, and then fourth place was the Galacti, piloted by Lychee, the best black player in the world. Shoutouts to him. He is a really cool guy and fantastic player. So, as I guess just looking at the Galacti list real quick, it is a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different cards. So the entire deck is made up of 10 cards. The majority of it is Venmon, obviously, because you can have as many of them as you want with the new Venmon. Then he is running the new Snatch with the old Snatch. He's running the Zenith. He's only running the promo Destro, so the old Destro is Gonzo. Then he is running 2 Shadow Seraphi Aces, 3 Galactis, and then 4 Fusion Eyes, and 2 Final Zubagon Punch on top of 4 Zeniths. So, for the most part, that's kind of just the deck in a nutshell. Not really much to it, but hey, he was able to find some success. So, cool to him. I think, like, Galactimon, when not faced off against other black or blue decks, can do pretty well because he can have some really good protection and good defense, and then his passive burn, if they can't remove him, is also really nice. So, yeah, definitely go check out that deck on stream. I think you could find that VOD on Risu's channel. And yeah, that's the only thing that's really worth mentioning. I guess I'll just take a look at 7 Great Demon Lords for a hot second, because it is the first time we're seeing it technically in this format. And as far as the big changes to the deck, nothing really has changed. They splashed in a Lucemon X Antibody, and outside of Lucemon X Antibody, they're also running Karatas. So instead of playing like Sistermons to draw and cycle, they're just playing the Tamer Karata to do it more consistently. Sure, you don't have the body for Gate of Deadly Sins to delete, but you're able to draw and discard every single turn. So it helps with the deck's overall consistency. There is a little tech choice with running 1 copy of the old Chaos mode that could delete a Digimon or Tamer, so it's just another good card, especially since you could use that as the Digimon you actually want to Digivolve into Lucemon X Antibody with. Outside of that, it's the same deck that we've seen before. Just wanted to point out some new tech. Also Shoto's in here, so that's a thing. So that is the Carta Magica event. Because every other deck we've seen before, and like I kind of stated before, the meta really hasn't been changing that much. So, Europe Grand Finals. I'm not even going to attempt to say that name. I'm just going to butcher it. So, this was 663 players. Keep in mind, Europe does not actually have to fight for invites. They just show up to the event and they play. That's it. So it's a super big event. And we have the top 8 decks and top 8 archetype breakdown. So it was 3 Mirage, 2 Great Angels, 1 Imperial, 1 7 Great Demon Lords, and 1 Purple Hybrid. So cool that 7 Great Demon Lords can still go the distance. It just means that people aren't really playing it, but the deck hasn't really lost that much steam. Probably lost a little bit, but not that much. As far as what actually won the event, it was Mirage. Shocker. Mirage has been doing absolutely gangbusters recently because of just, the design shifts of the game favor what he is doing, especially with his matchup spread. It favors what he's doing. Then second place was Imperial, third place was 3 Great Angels, and fourth place was 7 Great Demon Lords. So again, taking a look at 7 Great Demon Lords, we could see it's almost the exact same as the list before. This time, they're running a Moon Millennium Mon as a nice tech choice, on top of a Mastimon, and then they have Porcupamon to be able to try to snipe Floodgates. And then they're running the Mako Tamer to try to find the Lucimons, because this is also running one of the old Chaos Mode and one of the new Chaos Mode on top of the 7 Great Demon Lord Chaos Mode. So that's cool. Yeah, and a Pummel Whack is a discard target. That's basically it. Then the more important list is 3 Grey Angels, because we don't see this list a whole lot, and it really hasn't changed outside of the addition of Shadow Seraphimon. So they're actually playing the old Shadow Seraphimon with the new one. The new one's obviously an Ace Digimon and is kind of insane. But yeah, it's just another deck that takes advantage of having some really good protections, and if you're unable to out those protections, then it could just wall you out of the game and steamroll you from there. So yeah, that's basically it. Because the yellow vaccine package can still move relatively fast, even without the TK to set up the Patamon to make it even more consistent. So yeah, that is that. Feel free again to look at any of the deck lists more specifically over on EggmanEvents.com. With that all out of the way, now we can actually get into the main topic, which is going to be design do's and don'ts. So again, the idea and concept is to kind of just learn from their mistakes and just not do them. That's kind of just the idea. So I'm going to start things off because I know we have both different perspectives and experiences. I'm going to start things off with the biggest rule that they should almost never do is cheating on the resource system. If they avoided the usage of, let's just say, the text gain memory, cards are immediately more fair because you're not cheating on the resource system. I think gaining memory for this game counts as our ramp, and ramp in a lot of other card games is incredibly dangerous, and especially the way Digimon works compared to other card games, ramp is doubly, if not triply good because of how much we're able to do now with as little memory as possible. So that's one of my big do's and don'ts is do not cheat on the resource system. I think reducing Digivolution cost is better and healthier than gaining memory as long as the reduction does not equal 0. If the reduction equals 0, you immediately have a problem. And they learned that with Digisorption a couple of times, which is why most Digisorptions don't Digizorb to 0 anymore. So that's kind of like the push and pull of do not cheat on your resource system, because the game is designed and balanced around the resource system, and the second we start throwing that out is the second the game basically turns to Yu-Gi-Oh, where you could just do whatever, whenever, for however. So
Yeah, because I think a good example of that is you could look at the Galactic engine, as you said earlier, that players were able to go into the Mirage, just abusing that Galactic engine as example.
Yeah, because the way that engine works is you you put your what's currently on the top of your stack to the bottom, and then you gain the resources to basically go back into the same level as what you just lost. Except there's a couple of cards that can now net you memory for doing that, and then your level 5s also reduce their cost. So you're not spending as much as you're losing half the time until you go up into your big boss monster Digimon, which is going to be your level 7s or 6s, then you're actually spending something. It's incredibly free all the way up until your level 6, and that's partially what makes that engine so stupidly broken. The Tamer helps facilitate it and make it even easier and more broken, but it's broken even without the Tamer. So, do you have any do's and don'ts, Jay Stewart?
I think for me, so this is going to be my experience from Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I quit Yu-Gi-Oh! Because of how stupidly absurd decks were able to just do this whole one card package of taking I'm just going to take this Dragon Link's engine and I'm going to mix it with the Thunder Dragons engine here, and then I'm going to mix it with a Blue Eyes engine here, and just throw one or two different cards and just abuse these engines to where I could just turn one turn card combo kind of situation. Like just kind of like it kind of does relate back to the whole cheating the resources of getting like a board in Yu-Gi-Oh with like 17 negations, like 5 bodies on on your side of the field, for example, that just do absurd things off of just one card. I think is a problem. But like the reason why that was kind of the thing is because, like I said, you can mix different engines with different things, and we're kind of starting to see that, say with Digimon, with the whole Galaxy engine being used, and then top end is like Mirage, is a Hexablow, it's whatever you want it to be kind of situation. So I think what Digimon needs to really focus on, especially with these next 4 sets that are coming out, is do not make things too generic of engines for any deck to use. Like stick to a theme you want. Like make it like, oh, this can only be used with dark animals. This can only be used with like the galaxy, like the dusk and dawn trades, so to say, something like that.
Yes. I completely agree. Um the more generic a card is, the higher levels of play it would see. And I we kind of talked about this before on one of my more other design focus, where generic cards should not be as strong as more archetype specific cards. So a simple example of that is, like, you have a 3 cost on play searcher, like look at top 3 cards. Cool. You could have a searcher look for, let's just say, any Digimon. Um Top 3. Any Digimon or Tamer. We'll just use Ukamon as the example. That card's incredibly good for that specific reason, because it is searching as deep as the majority of other searchers, because most searchers are top 3. Very few searchers are top 4 or top 5. And then usually on top 3 searches, most of the time it's looking for 2 things archetype specific, but realistically, most of the time you're only going to be ever hitting one target. And Ukamon, I guess, like the downside of like the top 3 generic searches, you only get one target, but it's guaranteed on you're able to pick any of those cards, versus the other one where you have to look more specific, which then narrows your deck building decisions in terms of how it's going to be used, which is why a card like Ukamon is just so popular, is because of how much power you're getting for basically no actual trade-off. You could say that, sure, the 1 cost Evo is the trade-off, or the fact that you can't Digivolve on top of it is the trade-off, but let's be honest, that's not really a trade-off. Um, that's just that.
Especially when
Yeah,
especially when Uko could like hatch and then next turn, oh, I'm gonna push up. Therefore, I get to do the same thing again, and because I pushed up, hatched again, do the same thing my next turn right away.
yeah.
Like
It
it'd be a
allows you
different
to
story if
set up
maybe
your.
Ukomon didn't hatch.
Yeah, it allows you to set up the rookie that you actually want for no actual like speed disadvantage. Uh, so it's just a insanely nutty card, and because of how generic it is, it's it's usually going to be preferred heavier, or like weighted heavier, compared to a lot of other more in archetype support. Just because of just how good and generic it is, and we're seeing that a lot with a lot of the other cards, like a lot of like the scrambles, memory boosts, and training cards, all hyper generic, like hyper generic. And decks are starting to adopt to run like 2 scrambles, 2 memory boosts, 4 trainings for your traditional stack based deck, and there goes almost a fifth of your deck for you. So, like, yes, archetypes do railroad you into that archetype, but generics railroad you even harder to playing the generics versus anything and everything else in the entire game. Um, which is what Mirage has been doing for a while, and why Mirage is just such a hated deck, is because he hasn't gone away, because he's just so good and he adopts so many tools for no real deck building restriction cost. So, but yeah, I agree. Keeping the power level of generics lower than archetype specific ones is definitely a good one. To kind of like bring it back in. And speaking of generics, um, shoot, now I just lost my train of thought. I'll think on it later.
Well, I have another one if you want it.
Oh
Me to
yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
So I think another thing too is like thing that Digimon needs to focus on is avoiding net zero. What I mean by that is this. Like in Yu-Gi-Oh, there's like a card that's still hit on the ban list. For example, Pot of Greed. You play that one card and you get to draw two cards at no cost, nothing, and technically it's a +1, you could argue for that. But with Digimon, you can even like kind of do the same thing where it's like, oh, by doing the whole training cards, it's a 2 cost, yes, but I get that two back, so therefore it's free in a nutshell, just for a later turn kind of situation. Like I know we've discussed it before and everything, but just avoiding like those situations that where you play something, it shouldn't be free. You shouldn't be getting benefit for just doing something for free. There should be a cost with it.
I 100% agree, and that's kind of like where Digimon ran into a lot of tempo issues is because they had a lot of cards basically just net them zero, or right now, certain cards in combination with other cards are creating net zero instances, which is what's propelling and allowing decks to be able to move as quickly as they currently are. And because some decks and some mechanics have the privilege of being more proactive versus reactive, again, is especially with cards enabling reactive abilities to be more proactive, that's the true, like, that's truly what's making the game kind of start going haywire, or like helping make the game go haywire. So, like using Mirage as an example, you have the EX4 Galmon, which has the inheritable ability of gain a memory when you make the opponent add a card to their hand. Well, now you have a level 4 that forces both players to draw. Therefore, most of the time, it took the opponent having something on the field in order for you to bounce it to their hand, in order to add a card to their hand. But now you turn that reactive ability into something proactive. So now it allows you to move faster because that card's intended use is not actually being used for its intended use. Um, and that's partially like why Mirage got like as broken as it got as quickly as it got, because it did get a couple of hits before, which is why the level 5 got hit, because again, too generic, a lot of other decks can use it, and it was super easy to trigger the abilities proactively instead of reactively, even though the bounce to level 4 or lower back to the opponent's hand it did require the opponent to have a level 4 or lower, but the game was in a different state where that was a more common thing. It's not uncommon, but it was more common because of just the pacing differences. But harping, now I remember. So you actually helped me remember with that one. The one thing I think that's a big do and don't for this game specifically, and just TCGs in general, is additional costs most of the time are not actual additional costs. And but by what I mean by that is like, oh, I have to discard a card. That's not a cost. That's a benefit. Especially if your deck revolves around the trash. That's a benefit. So don't pretend like that's actually a bad thing. And a lot of card games like to pretend like discarding and milling is a bad thing, when 9 out of 10 times that's probably the best thing that they could have done or have happened. So, like, there's a lot of those, this is an additional cost, this should be a bad or negative thing, that generally get turned into super positives, is what I like to label it as, because they like to attach abilities that trigger when you do that specific thing. And that's what's making those types of strategies propel even more, is because of those super positives. We've seen this with Itmon from EX2, where when he's milled, he mills 3 more. And if you hit another Itmon, it doesn't mill another 3 more. But the fact that you turned something you wanted to do into something better, like Deathslinger and Rivals Barrage and Promo Wizardmon, all fit in that same type of category, which is what made those cards so good, and what made that deck so good is because milling is already one thing you're trying to do, but now you're milling and then gaining free benefits and advantages for doing so. That's a little excessive, and we have that everywhere, or not exactly everywhere. We have it in a lot of places in Digimon where they kind of just need to stop doing that because, again, those super positives are free added benefits and value. Um, and for no real additional cost is the problem because they think that those costs are actual costs when they're not. So we've seen this with like removing cards from security. We've seen this with discarding cards. It's just a very classic thing that Bandai likes to think is a downside, but usually has way more benefits than it actual is a detriment. So, do you got any other do's and don'ts when it comes to design, Jay Stewart, or like just play patterns and like deck building in general?
I don't know if this would be considered deck building, but I would say it's more of access to cards that they need. Like, take for example the close tamer and everything. That's promo. It's like if you're relying on making that tamer a promo to make that card like that deck good, and it's not accessible to get, kind of like how we were seeing with like the promo Flame Dramon, that would really help the blue armor variant with the Magnamon X, for example. Then, obviously restricting the access to that promo kind of makes it a little hard for players to do that unless they have just credit card no limits, so to say, where they could just buy stuff like that. It doesn't give other decks that you want, like even the uh, Kawagamon, all the other promos that are out there. Like if you want these decks to shine and get represented, then you need to have them come out in a timely manner where the decks that they were supposed to. Like even Saberdramon. Technically over in JP, they got the Saberdramon and all them in BT13, but we got it in EX5. So getting the cards that we should get at a timely manner and also easy access to them to make the decks you want them to work with actually have a chance to shine, I think is going to be really important as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always an advocate for accessibility, and Bandai has usually been pretty bad and very openly bad on how awful promos are. So, like, yeah, I'm literally in the camp where it's just like if you can't give us the promos, I'd rather not have them at all. Like, and if you need to fix something by making a promo, and that's the intended use of it, like update packs and whatnot, then actually make it accessible so players can get their hands on it. Like that's the whole point. Don't, and especially since they're doing that with like D tier decks anyway, it's like don't like gatekeep players from playing the bad decks because they require a promo just to be remotely playable. Like it's just so disingenuous. And really like shitty and shady business practices. But I guess if that's what makes the money, that's what makes the money. Or like at least they kind of been trying to entice us to play in stores with like store packs and putting them there recently, or like box toppers that aren't one off. So they're trying. They're just not trying hard enough in my perspective. Um, but yeah. Now I gotta think of one. I had one again, and then I just lost it. That's probably gonna be a common thing because I didn't write these down, and I probably should have. That's why you write things down, people. Take notes is really good and important, so that way you don't forget. Um, oh, now I
I mean,
remember. Yeah, so now I remember. A design. One of the bigger like design aspects of the game when it comes to how Digimon is designed is the health system. And I think like the way security works is not the greatest. It has its own level of like RNG and intrigue, which I think is fine. But I think like how they've been designing security effects is not, and it hasn't been very great. I think like security effect activate main, that's fine. But like when you, and this is going to sound extremely controversial, but I think like one of the better designed security cards is something like a Heaven's Judgment, where it's just like, okay, obviously you want to use the card from your hand, so therefore the security effect is going to be suboptimal. And I feel like that's a good approach to making security cards is is the intended use to actually use the option, or is the intended use for it to be a security threat? I think like certain cards, activate main is a pretty dangerous like statement, because uh, you could get so much extra free advantage that it takes away like, oh, I want this and I would prefer this to be in the security. And then also like setting up security should be difficult, because that's the health system of the game. It shouldn't be just something willy-nilly and hyper free to do, because this few times we've seen it, it's hyper free, it usually is pretty toxic. Looking at any iteration or variation of security control, just easy free healing is usually a ginormous mistake. And like right now, because of how security is working, like it's not like people are afraid of hitting security. It's just incentivizing us to hit it all at once rather than have that chip. Like if your deck can chip, or like if your deck has to chip, it will chip. But chipping usually is the worst form of dealing damage, because of how high powered and fast the games have gotten, and how much more impactful like a stray security card can really end up being. And I think like that's not necessarily indicative of that great of design, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's fair because I know like I'm gonna go back to like I know I mentioned like the whole bees engine and everything. Like that's probably been like one of the best times Bandai has actually been trying to do something unique with this security system, using like your security stack as the quote unquote beehive for the deck. It's like it's a fun idea that I wish they would be able to try to explore a little bit more often. But because I know lately, because like in the past, most of the time the security effects have been doing what they've all been kind of like wanting to try to do is recover of some kind or just using the security as additional resources. But it's like with the bees deck, it's like trying to take a unique approach to it, so to say.
Yes. And I think bees is probably the most tactful way that they've ever handled like security manipulation. Like it sounds really unbalanced at times, but like after playing against and playing with the Royal Base deck, it's incredibly fun and very satisfying when you set up your big defense to make it hard for the opponent to hit your security. And then there's some like kooky and crazy security plays that you can make, like using protoform, where it's just like, okay, my Digimon dies, protoform, put it back into security, it's right on top. Oh, hey, look, I'm gonna have a card that adds it to my hand because I'm putting a royal based Digimon underneath. Like there's a lot of like really cute and like interesting play lines that you could do with proper security manipulation. I think like just hard slam heal is pretty bad, or just unrestricted heal, as we've seen in the past, is also pretty bad, especially with the way that they've been designing certain security threats to be like really piss poor and overpowered and overtuned. But most of those are kind of gone because we can't afford to run them anymore, because generic cards started taking up removal spots. So, because one thing that I noticed is it's usually better to, like I said, be more proactive than reactive. So it's better to accelerate yourself rather than slow down the opponent half the time. Which is why, like, I think floodgates is something they kind of have to be careful about. Because floodgates are in the game to stop something specific on purpose, because you let that get out of control. Like, I can't really like say any nicer. You let a certain aspect of the game get out of control, therefore this type of a card is needed to slow it down. I think that's incredibly poor and lazy card design. Granted, yes, we do need those floodgates, but again, we only need them because you let things get out of hand. And the more prominent floodgates are needed, like the more prominent the problem actually is that they're trying to highlight and solve. So I know I kind of just did a twofer. Do you got anyone? Another one, Jay Stewart?
Yeah, I think the only other idea I could think of as of right now is kind of something that we haven't been like Bandai has kind of been doing a lot better as of late now. But I think what they need to make sure that they do for all future products from here on out is don't abandon like a lot of decks, so to say. Like typically what I mean by that is the I'll take the EX4 for example. There's the whole four great dragons and everything deck that was in that, and it really couldn't keep up with all the other decks, and it just never really got any kind of support whatsoever in a long time. So it's just a deck that was dead in the water of a rival. It didn't even get any kind of support. Like even just being able to try to introduce one or two cards, kind of like what they did in BT16 for the Dusk and Dawn deck, helped out majorly, and it's why we're seeing like the Dusk and Dawn cards being used as often as they are now, so to say.
Yeah, I mean, they very easily could be supporting like older decks. Not everything in a set has to be 110% on theme with the set. They could just throw in, similar to what they were doing with the update promos, they honestly could just throw in a card or two that's just there to help an older deck. Because Bandai already doesn't care about like the sealed or limited experience, which is why it's always been kind of trash and really awkward to play because the game's not designed for that. So I think like yeah, supporting having better legacy support for some of the more casual decks definitely would be beneficial in some capacity. Way more than what they have been doing, that's for sure. But
Yeah, because like you can even take a look at the mother deck and everything. Like yes, there is the Jerry promo, but even in the BT19, we're gonna see there's gonna be a new Evil Jerry, so to say, and a new option card too that goes with that deck as well. I think there might be something else, but I could be wrong. But just doing like a minimum of like two or three cards would just be the significant impact importance of what could really help a deck shape up to kind of still stay relevant. It doesn't need to be A tier quality to make the deck broken. It just needs to be like just make it rogue, if anything, kind of level.
yeah. And kind of playing off that in a way, like they definitely could be doing a better job at some of the legacy support. It seems like what they're doing is they're just waiting for the specific set in order to just update it. But unfortunately, there is an imbalance on what gets supported and what doesn't get supported. Especially let alone good support. Like we've had 1.5 million gallant support, it feels like, but none of it has actually been good. So there is like a fine balance between like support that actually is meaningful and support that isn't meaningful, and they've kind of just been figuring things out as far as like, oh, we don't exactly know what we want to do with the support, so sometimes they just leave it half baked, it feels like. But as far as like just some other like general design things that they should avoid, um if the one of the bigger ones that Bandai very clearly has an awful problem with is actual proper balances. And what I mean by proper balances is if you introduce a mechanic, you need to introduce a counter mechanic in a sense. So we kind of see this on a very basic level. We see this with security attack. So there's such thing as security attack +1, and there's such thing as security attack -1. So that kind of is a good counterbalance to security attack in general, because security attack, especially if you put it on like a multi-attacker, is incredibly dangerous because of how much faster you're able to do damage, especially paired up with a multi-attacker. So like it makes that type of a mechanic unbalanced, which is why you need to have some sort of balancing act to it. And right now we have a couple of different card types that have borderline zero counterbalancing to it, which is what's making them absolutely insane. And the key one that I'm looking at is delay. We have a total of one card in the entire game that we currently don't have yet that interacts with delayed options. So delayed options literally just sit there and are free until you feel like you want to use it, because the opponent isn't going to be able to remove it in any way, shape, or form, which I think is very poorly, like, that's very poorly balanced and poorly designed. I like the idea of delay, but because there is no counter to delay, like the ability to snipe a delayed option so that way the opponent doesn't get the second half of the benefit, that would dramatically increase the amount of interactions that we have in the game. And there's also, like, that's not limited to just that type of a thing. Like, the grave or the trash is another big contention point where it's like, hey, stuff can go in there really easily. And if you're a purple player or like a deck that uses the trash, stuff can go out pretty easily, but there's nothing really to disrupt the trash. And one thing that I learned from Magic the Gathering, just from a good case study example, is usually when they have things be super trash heavy and trash focused, it's always good to have that counter card to be able to stop those types of strategies and actually, again, have some counterplay so that way a meta can actually develop. So it's really important to be able to actually have the ability to interact or respond with uninteractive elements that we currently are finding ourselves with. So, like, I think with trash based, as like an example, there's a total of 3 cards in the entire game that impact the trash. 2 of them are on level 7s, and one is interacting, and one is literally from the card, like the color, that interacts with the trash the most. So it just really goes to show that there's this ginormous discrepancy, which is why purple as a color has been, like, as strong as it has been, is because its setup is borderline in of itself. So once it's set up, there's nothing the opponent can do to actually stop or interact with that setup to actually have any form of like counterplay. And then because your deck is already set up, your combos generally get hyper degenerate really quickly because it's still expecting you to be setting up half the time, is kind of like where I'm getting at with that example more specifically. But just the ability to actually interact with some previously uninteractive elements. Like, it's kind of cool that sometimes like these blanket effects can interact with the raising area to prevent that. And I think that's kind of cool. Some of them, again, are kind of degenerate and toxic, but that's beside the point. The point is, every facet of the game needs to have some form of interaction. On more of just a generic, like, a hyper specific like level. I'm not saying it needs to be hyper generic. I'm just saying there needs to be something there to interact with that particular element of the game. And that's one of the big things Bandai tends to fail at the most, is we're going to introduce all of these cool new things that you can't do anything about. And that's what reduces interactivity.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair because you could kind of look at BT7, for example. That was like a very heavy tamer reliant format, and people were like saying, "Oh, there's not enough tamer hate, so to say, decks." Because I think the only card at that time was the Chaos Lucimon, which is a secret rare, and it was kind of hard to get out at times, so to say. Either you had to be playing a Lucimon deck, which non-existent at that time, or you had to be playing some kind of purple deck that could play out your levels 5 for free of some kind from the track, something like that. But it was just really hard to play, like use that. And even by the time BTA came around, and we got Black or Greymon, in that there wasn't really, because the problem with it is you kind of needed particular colors. I think red deletes Digimon, and black deletes Tamers, and it's up to a play cost of 6. So if your opponent had one 3-cost Tamer and one 4-cost Tamer, you couldn't really delete both Tamers, so to say, if you wanted to. And it was just like you had to like play like either you play like this dual color, like I think by the time BT9 came out, we got a black and red deck that wasn't Greymon focused. It was more dual color of using both black and red to try to use the best advantage of that Black War Greymon as example. But even like your example right now of the option cards being uninteractable. Right now, there's only one card currently in the game that actually interacts with option cards, and that's Gospel of the Fallen Angel. And it's very particular about when you delete the option cards. Because it literally says, by digivolving one of your Digimon with Lucimon in its name into a Digimon with Lucimon in its name in the trash, by reducing the cost by 3, trash one of your opponent's option cards in the battle area. And that's the delay effect of that one, so to say. And the only card that we know of as of right now that's going to be able to get rid of other option cards is going to be the Justimon, and that's not until 2.5.
Yeah, like the one thing about TCGs is there needs to be interaction. Like that's literally the whole point. And I'm not just talking about counter spells and whatnot. I'm talking about having the ability to manipulate any facet of the game. Like right now, we see Velgermon being popular because he has technically this built-in alt-win condition on milling the opponent out. That's what's making him so appealing. On top of him just being an absolutely like ridiculously strong card for what his level is. But the counterbalance to him, obviously, is his Digivolution cost for anything outside of using him in the particular way that he's supposed to is a lot higher. But again, purple has ways to help mitigate that, or because you are playing the package, then most likely he's always going to be on the cheaper side. But I digress. Like, having some form of interaction with every aspect of the game is what makes the game better. Reducing that and telling us we can't do stuff only makes the game worse. Which is why, like, this kind of brings into my next point. Protections need to have better holes. So, like, right now, the best protective card, like, the strongest, most protective card in the game is Magnamon X Antibody. He basically has Omni Protect, which is really strong, and it's so strong that it presents very few weaknesses to it. You want to know what the weaknesses are? You have to either A, have enough DP to hit over it, which for some decks in some colors is actually pretty hard to do. B, get around it, which again, most colors don't have the ability to just become unblockable. Or C, have some sort of defense of your own and hope that defense actually works. So having like a chump blocker so that way it can't manipulate security in order to gain its protections. That's a potential route. It's not the best like weakness. Aces is kind of in that same camp where it's just like if they're able to manipulate their security before you can ace, then your ace really doesn't mean anything. But aces are supposed to try to out Magnamon before he makes the hit onto the security to trigger his protectives. And then finding like sticky or soft removals is the other big thing where it's just like, oh, all my DP minuses stack. Once your protection falls off, my removal kicks in. And that's huge and partially why Numemon was as good as it was because it had some of the best sticky removal in the entire game. So that is something important to look out for when it comes to protectives is like what once you start adding more and more protections, the game starts being designed and balanced around those protections more specifically, and the harder it is to get around those holes in its armor, the worse the game is going to be as a result. So we see like with Yu-Gi-Oh! And Buddy Fight and a couple of other games where like certain cards are just like borderline uninteractable just because their protections are way too high for where the current game is, or if the game is just able to handle it, that's because they needed to basically figure out ways to handle that level of removal for those omni protections. So yeah, it's protection is always going to be a very slippery slope, which is why it needs to have more weaknesses and not cover everything. I probably
Yeah,
could have said that better, but that's the point.
no, and I think it's a fair point too, because I mean, uh, BT9 for example, like I'm not trying to use BT9 every single time, but BT9 for example, like the Garurumon X Antibody, the only protection it offered was, oh, I only protect for battle. Greymon X is, oh, I protect if you were to get bounced to deck or hand. That's the only kind of protections I can offer. Like even just limiting the protections is like really good. Now, obviously, people will say, Alphamon had like the best protection of its time because it had the DP protection, deletion protection, and then if you were able to abuse other cards like Congo and Breath of Gods at the same time, then it gave it the ultimate protection, so to say.
Yeah, and that's what made Alphamon as strong as it did, was because not only could it just hit really hard like a freight train, but it also, because it was so well protected, was incredibly hard to stop and deal with. So like this is partially why we see this decline in removal based options, is because, well, if these aren't working, why am I playing them? So like against a lot of decks where they do have some really good protections, that's why we see this like shift in removal, where now we're not running as many hard removal, if any hard removal at all, and instead a lot of the best removal types are actually in soft removal, which is the removal that's not removing the Digimon, it's just stopping their ability to be as efficient, which is why, like, again, de-digivolve is just one of the strongest abilities currently in the game to disrupt the opponent, is because that's one of the few things that Bandai has left the holes for, which is why every time we see de-digivolve or the ability to de-digivolve, if it gets easier and easier, those cards become better and better, is because, oh, your only weakness is to de-digivolve? Cool, I guess I have to use that. And then that railroads us into specific, like, archetypes or card usage and design patterns that only make things worse, not better. Which is where we're finding ourselves right now, is because protections are also pretty high. So why waste our time running removal when it's just not going to work anyway? And that's partially why like OTK decks are so prominent, is because like not only are they fast and consistent, but they also can just win the game pretty quickly and easily, because they're taking advantage of the fact that there is no real security threats anymore, because we're not allowed to run them because of the Digimon having such high levels of protection, on top of being forced to play hyper-specific generic cards to accelerate our overall game plan. So you can already see like the fact that we are down this deep into that type of a rabbit hole, why Bandai needs to avoid doing certain things like that, is because it's not good for the overall health of the game. And that's like the whole point with a lot of these like ones that we've been talking about, is Bandai has been failing pretty bad at having a lot of cards like that just are overperforming because of these design oversights. And these design oversights, if there's too many of them, they become too ingrained into the game itself to ignore. So it's just like, okay, because Goblimon from BT14 exists, it's limiting the overall design of any level 4 Digimon that can draw and discard. Why? Because he gains memory, and that becomes an issue, because like you could start to see all of these compounding issues start folding in on themselves to create the problem that we have currently, which is why a lot of players are feeling that they just want a really big ban and restriction list, so much so that some people even just want a like soft reboot of the game to put it back into a healthier state, so that way they don't have to fall into those pitfalls ever again. And I really hope that they've at least learned from some of their mistakes over the years, instead of keep doing the same thing and repeating them over and over and over again and expecting a different result. You want to know what we call that? Insanity. And yeah, that's insanity in design is honestly one of the worst things that you could do, because that's what lets the game spiral out of control faster than anything else.
Yeah, because I know Yu-Gi-Oh is like, back when I quit and everything, it just kept on, like there would be like a card that was problematic, so to say. Like I don't know, for example, Appaloosa. It was a card where, based on the number of, like, by decreasing its attack by so many points, you can negate an effect and everything. It's like that started becoming a problem, and then what Konami did was they make a card that is like even more busted than that to try to fix that problem. But it's like, well, you didn't change anything because you still have a card that creates, if not now, a bigger problem. So I don't know what you were thinking there, Konami, because it's not helping the game.
Right, and using some of my past TCG experiences with Buddy Fight, that game reached such a power apex that the game literally devolved into OTKs, kind of like what Yu-Gi-Oh currently is for the most part, and like we're slowly but surely heading there with how Digimon is playing out because 3 out of the top 8 decks that we currently have are OTK based decks. I wonder why that is because it's easier, safer, and more consistent to just set up, do nothing, and then win by like turn 3 or 4 and punch all of the opponent's security away, removing any element of interaction that you can have with the opponent from the equation. And half the time, what's extra dumb is the OTK decks. Not only do they just do all of that, hit hard, and are hyper consistent because of these generic cards, but they also remove whatever threats are going to try to be stopping them along the way. So that's the extra dumb part where it's just like, okay, so not only am I controlling the opponent, I'm also winning the game because I can interact with their Digimon, but they can't interact with me. So it creates a very one-sided game state, which is why like some of the best decks are the ones that are really you're able to play very well against or interact with at all. So yeah, and I get that's like the end goal is to try to make the best deck possible, but this is a game and it's supposed to meant to be interactive.
Yeah, because I know like Bandai didn't want necessarily as many OTK decks, so
No, they
the
tried
idea of what
nerfing them.
Aces, yeah, and they created Aces to try to really help stop, hit the brakes on the OTK, so to say. Because the idea of an Ace is when your opponent attacks, you could counter for free and get something to get you back in the game, so to say. But you take an OTK deck like Mirage that's able to, say, return all of your ace targets, so to say, it kind of defeats the purpose of what the ace was trying to do at that point. So the only answer you could try to potentially do is give all these lower bodies like these really big protections, but that's not going to solve the problem either. It's just going to make it more busted, so to say.
Correct. And like going back to the whole buddy fight example, the game before Bushy Road decided to end it was basically OTK the game where it was like they printed a couple of cards that just dramatically increased consistency and damage output, and then they recently had like a anniversary set to try to remove the OTKs by making some absolutely broken defensive options. But they had to counter broken with even more broken. And like I think it'll make like where those cards left the game probably was in a better state because of it, but it definitely like the damage was already done and the design space for the game has been completely eaten up because of how fast they decided to move with the overall damage of the game. And I think like that's pretty unfortunate because I really liked the base and core of Buddy Fight, and seeing Digimon head down those same paths, it scares me because I don't want the game to end. I don't think the game's going to end anytime soon, not especially since it seems like they're trying to put a lot of effort into unification. But design wise, they're going to be hitting a lot of they're going to need to be hitting a lot of cards because of the ingrained problems of the current deep-seated design issues that we're currently seeing and facing. And like there's probably more that we haven't even discussed, but we're getting to it being long enough of an episode to where I just wanted to introduce the idea and concept that this is kind of where the game is going wrong, is in these deep-seated design issues that they really, really seem to enjoy reusing over and over again, and then they'd be like, oh, oopsies, I guess it does break the game. I had no idea it was gonna do that. Whoops. Like, it just boggles my mind how many times they repeated the same mistake over and over again in the past 4 to 5 years that we've been playing this game.
Yeah, because I know some people have talked about how they need to get playtesters that can actually tell them like, yo, this is a good idea, or yo, this is actually a really bad idea. Because, you know, as I said last episode, Bandai, they can make us want to play a black base Dark Nightmon deck with the Lord Nightmon to go with it. But the players just found, oh, I could just use a service package and literally any other good purple deck card and just make it even more busted than how you intended it to be. Because the players have the idea of competitiveness, while the designers probably have more of a fun game time with friends kind of aspect, so to say.
Right. They're not thinking of the long term ramifications of some of the cards that they've made. And I think that's the big problem, where it's just like some of these were very obviously designed in, like, they're very obviously designed to be used in specific ways. But once we start deviating from those ways and creating scenarios that they've never encountered and or even thought of, that's when like we truly can start breaking the game. And I can speak from experience, having good playtesters is nice. It's not going to solve all of the problems, but I don't even know if Bandai actually playtests what they currently have, to be fair. Like, some of these cards should never have been printed, to be honest. Like, it's crazy what they decided to try to print and what they thought was good and acceptable. And I get the onset of it was healthy intentions. It's like, oh yeah, the Galaxy Engine's supposed to do this to get up into Grace Novamon, but they didn't stop to think like, oh, I guess hard locking it to our own engine is going to be more beneficial in the long run. And they did that same exact oopsies with Shoto too, where it's just like, oh, I guess it should have just worked with its own cards, but anything can be a blocker now. That's fine. Like, is it really fine? Like, when Mother is a card, like, did you didn't stop and think about that? Or Demon Lords, you know, playing big bodies for like next to nothing.
And
No,
even the idea of like a Patamon from BT14
right.
with
It's like
Magnamon from
free,
BT16.
yeah, free evolutions. That's totally acceptable. I'm just like, no, no, it's not. It didn't have to be this way, and it doesn't have to be this way. If they just write down a couple of rules to follow to not do the same mistakes over and over again. And we could see in their ban and restriction list that we currently have, you could go through and read all 30 of the cards. They'll have very similar wording and reasonings on why they were hit, and the majority of them was because they didn't exactly anticipate how fast they would make the game. Or their overall impact on the game because they were too generic. Like, it's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So I think this is a good place to wrap it up. Any closing thoughts on this topic?
The only thing I could think of is like to anybody who's watching this on YouTube or even on Spotify. Obviously we have talked about the announcements that they did announce, but I mean, go ahead and let us know what your thoughts are and everything too as well. Just kind of curious to see what everyone thought of the live stream. I mean, I know last week I kind of mentioned it'd be nice if they announced a data for the banner restriction list. I didn't think it was going to happen, so I'm not disappointed in that. But do you think there's other things that they maybe could have announced potentially?
I mean, obviously more products like, oh, hey, we are planning like a reprint set. It's not really a reprint set. Like, they could do something what they're doing with the special limited set, where it's a smaller size product, doesn't cost as much as a full booster box, and it's just chock full of reprints. Like, I don't know. There's a ton that they could do that they're not doing, and again, that's why like I think Bandai doesn't know how to sell, and Bandai has tons of like internal negligence that they aren't even aware of that could be making the game better overall that they're not doing. And if anything, this whole statement really kind of just shows that they do not understand what they're doing at all. And they do not know how to make what they're doing better, because it's it really isn't that complicated to give the players what they want. They know, especially after the Europe national stream, they know we want a ban and restriction list. We've only been slowly asking for one for the past uh, 8 months at this point. Or is it no? It's like yeah, no, it's like
Three, I
six
would
to
say
eight
three.
months. I mean, ever since we got the BT16, we've been asking for specific hits and limitations, and we haven't gotten any. And I like so to kind of like round things out, not necessarily on the most sour of notes, but the one thing that I really would have loved to see them announce in that announcement was a scheduled ban and restriction every single BT set. I would have loved to see that. That would have been absolute icing, knowing that the game has gotten to such a powerful state that every single main set they need to reevaluate where the current state of the game is and figure out how to try to make it healthier. That would have given me the most confidence in the world that Bandai can do this job right. They've done it before with other games, but they're not doing it with Digimon. And I don't know why, but Digimon is currently their second biggest card game that they have right now. I know that they're trying to bank a lot on the Gundam game, and there's just an ever growing market for TCG competition. So you would want to think that they would put as much effort into their TCGs that they currently have, and they're not.
Yeah,
So
because I know East was like the announcer for that live stream, so maybe he could. Because I will say during that stream, I was not expecting to see East. I'm glad they actually had Digimon content creators kind of in that. So hopefully East maybe could have kind of explained some of the frustrations maybe some players had. I don't know if he could have or couldn't, but it would have been nice if maybe they could take the time to listen to what he who listens to his community and it help elaborate what their frustrations are and everything. Because even the idea of like the whole ban and restriction list to like every set for like set release and everything, it's not a bad idea either, especially since we're in going into unification. Because I'll take BT15 for example. Like obviously in JP, they were struggling for a long time with Apoclymon, and Bandai didn't want to hit, like they were trying to avoid hitting it before we got it, but ultimately they had to because of how problematic Apoclymon was. So I think with unification, when it happens, it's going to be a little bit easier to do the whole ban and restriction list because we're going to all be on the same format. We're going to be all on the same page, so to say.
that's why I would have loved to see it on the schedule, or like just a little slide saying every single main set, every single BT set, we are going to have a ban and restriction update. That would have given me the most confidence that they actually do care about the balance of their game. More so than, okay, Block 4 was dramatically underpowered compared to Block 3, which is nice, but that ultimately hurts Block 4 in a sense because nothing they made in Block 4 actually has mattered, or very little of it has actually mattered. And like we'll probably get into this in maybe like the next episode or something, but I'm very afraid of BT20 because anytime they have ever done X antibodies, there's always something incredibly broken about them. So I think this is a good place to wrap things up, kind of leave you a little teaser for what can potentially come in the next episode. And I want to take this time to thank everyone for listening. It means the absolute world to us that you actually care enough about our opinions to, well, actually hear it all the way to the end. So thank you everyone for coming out and listening, and we hope to see you in the next episode. Later.